So obviously we've had a huge update to CSGO that released just a couple of hours before me recording this video. It's the big update, which took place on December 8th, 2015, for future reference if people are looking back at this. This is just going to be my initial reactions to the update. I want to stress that they're initial reactions because I haven't really seen a whole lot of competitive play since the update. I watched a couple of North American matches for the Star Ladder qualifiers, and I played a little bit of DM, so I don't have a whole lot of data to work off of. I also don't know the exact raw numbers for how much things change as far as damage goes or movement inaccuracy goes, the actual like numbers in the code. I'm sure some other people like Slaw Squadron or Three Clicks Phillip or just different YouTubers out there will probably dig into the actual deep numbers. I know Thorn even mentioned on Twitter that he would as well use actual numerical data more heavily to really get to the finer points of the update. But these are just going to be kind of my initial reactions based on just reading the patch notes. And also, I am somewhat anticipating fixes to bugs. Like, for example, I know you can shoot the revolver during freeze time and while you're defusing. I expect bugs like that will be fixed. So when I'm doing my reactions, I'm anticipating some fine-tuning and tweaking and bugs being fixed before we really get to the meat of the update itself. I think some of these finer points will be addressed. So I'm just looking at really the main points, not just the finer things. And again, initial reactions based on limited data. So the first big change when you look at the patch notes, besides the stupid like winter update where you have gifts and holiday cheer, whatever the shit that is, just for the signs, whatever, that's fine. Just, you know, it is what it is. Happens every time during Halloween or Christmas or whatever. So whatever, skipping that part of the patch notes. The first thing to think about is the R8 Revolver. It is a brand new pistol to the game, which can replace the Deagle in your slot. And it is basically just an entirely new gun to the game. It is much different than any other gun in the sense that it has two firing modes, but I know we have some other guns that do have two firing modes, like the FAMAS or the Glock, which can be switched to burst fire. But in this case, it's just your left click and your right click are different. Your left click is a slower, more drawn out shot, where it's almost like you have to predict where your opponent's going to be. Because when you hold down left click, it takes a second before the bullet shoots, and if you let go of your left mouse button, it resets the whole timer all over again. So you basically either have to just sit there and keep like almost like you cook a grenade in a game. You have to like pre-cook your pistol and anticipate someone peeking out and then like line up the shot. Or, you know, you just have to like, it takes a second. Like if someone's standing still and you get to cook it and actually shoot off, then yeah, you don't have to anticipate it. But it's basically like almost having to predict a little bit. Or even if you don't have to predict, you could just strafe out and start doing it. If you see someone strafing, you just move your mouse over and the bullet will come out and it'll still hit. And the left click is super accurate, even at distance. So while it does take a little bit of time for the bullet to actually come out, it's quite accurate, and of course it's very devastating damage-wise. It's pretty much a one-hit kill at most distances. I mean, I'm sure like extreme far range it's not, but close range for sure. Pushing into medium range definitely. Even if they have armor, you're still doing between like 80 and 100 damage. So it's pretty ridiculous. And then there's the right click version, which is highly inaccurate and pretty random, but still at like close range, you're still probably going to hit them with it and to get into one hit kill, and you can fire it pretty rapidly with the right click. So yeah, this gun is complete and utter trash in its current situation. And in fact, I can't even really see a way in which this gun would ever be good are usable. I feel like this is just a shit way of, you know, getting more skins into the game. I get Valve has every reason from an economic perspective of trying to generate revenue or extra revenue through microtransactions to introduce new guns to the game every now and then, so they can also introduce a new set of skins and hype up people buying cases and hype up people buying skins and all this other shit. But it's just not needed. Like, why is this gun needed? What problem does it address that the game has? What problem does it solve? What new aspect of gameplay does it bring to the game in a positive way? It's just an unnecessary addition to the game. You know, I thought the same thing about some of the other pistols that got added to the game, like the CZ, for example. But apparently the reasoning for that was to kind of address, like, make eco rounds a bit more viable for teams to win, or whatever, if that was the logic. But this just makes no sense at all. And here's the thing, like I said at the beginning of the video, that when I was making my reactions to this, I would be actually anticipating like tweaks and changes. And I'm sure this gun will get nerfed at some point to not be as damaging. But at the same time, no matter what you do to this gun, I just can't ever see it being viable. I really don't get it at all. It just seems like a way to make more money. It doesn't add any value to the game, and it doesn't address any problems. It doesn't do anything. It's just a silly gun that should have never been introduced to the game. It was unnecessary. Why broke or I fix what isn't broken. It just doesn't make any sense, and I don't even want to address it any further than that. I think it's just super silly. Unfortunately, it won't be removed. There's just too much money to be made. There's already been skins released for it, so it'll somehow remain in the game. If we look at the history of this game, if it's anything like the CZ or the Tech 9, it'll take almost a year to get it to some type of workable state. I mean, think about how long the CZ was broken. I think I addressed this in an earlier video when I did another talk about CSGO updates, where basically the CZ was broken for a year. When it first got introduced in the game, it was super broken. It only cost a couple of $100. It was ridiculously OP. It took 4 or 5 months before they even increased the price on the gun, and it was still OP. It was just a little bit more expensive. And then it took another 3 or 4 months before they finally nerfed the draw out speed and the actual rate of fire. I mean, it took probably a good 7 to 9 months before they got the CZ to a somewhat workable state like we see it today. Same thing with the Tech 9. The only difference is because the CZ was OP, no one was really using the Tech 9 very much. So you didn't really notice it, but it was still a pretty broke gun for a while. And again, it took pretty much 7 or so months of time to get that gun to a somewhat workable state. And it's still quite powerful. Even though we'll talk about this patch a little bit later on with movement and accuracy with pistols that addresses it to a degree. But again, if history serves, it's going to take forever for this R8 Revolver to be fixed, unfortunately. And that's a really damn shame because it has no value. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's my initial reaction, of course, but I don't see me, jumping from that initial reaction anytime soon. So let's just address some of the other changes in the game. So gameplay-wise, competitive matchmaking times are now 1 minute and 55 seconds and 40 seconds for the C4. And apparently, while this has been added to matchmaking, this will also be what is used in CSGO Major Championships. So basically, Valve is still going to strong-arm leagues indirectly into forcing these timers as well. Of course, all the leagues currently are still using 1 minute and 45 seconds and a 35-second C4. But just like what happened with the maps when Valve introduced their version of Mirage at kind of the initial major, all the leagues eventually had to swap to Valve's versions of the maps to appease the players because players didn't want to have to practice 2 different versions of a map to compete in an online league as well as prepare for a Valve major tournament. So everyone just kind of universally across the board adopted the Valve map pool. So I assume that leagues will be forced to accept this 1 minute and 55-second timer and 40-second C4 to comply with these Valve majors and to make it to where teams aren't having to use, different timers between league play and tournament play outside of Valve majors and Valve majors themselves. So I'm sure we will see everyone switching to this at some point to make it to where players aren't using 2 different systems to compete in CSGO. So with that in mind, this will probably be enforced universally in CSGO very quickly unless some type of change from Valve comes before that happens. As far as what I think about this, it's pretty much a compromise between what matchmaking has always been and what competitive play has always been. It's like slap dab in the middle. Instead of a 45-second bomb timer in matchmaking and 35 seconds of competition, we're meeting in the middle at 40, for example. And it's pretty similar with the round timer itself. It will change gameplay in a sense that it gives a little bit more time for CTs to retake a site after the bomb has been planted, which means you might see CTs a bit more prone to go for it since they have more time to do so, especially if a player who would normally be way out of position because they're way on the other side of the map now actually has 5 extra seconds to make their way over to the other side of the map to still be a part of a retake. So it may encourage retakes a bit more, pending the economy, of course, which is still the biggest factor for whether or not a CT would want to go for a retake. It also gives more stress on the terrorists to buy time for the bomb explosion because there's more time left on the clock. However, with the round timer being longer, it allows for that slower, methodical style of play that some teams use, like a Navi or a Luminosity or what have you. for having more time to play around with the map, and maybe it changes tactics and strategy a bit. It buys more time for maybe more elaborate fakes or different things like that. So there's all kinds of things that this could do to the game meta wise, and whether that's positive or negative is kind of up for debate. I don't think it's so drastic of a change that it kills the game. It just is going to take some getting used to, having more time to work with on the clock, having more time to work with on the bomb timer from either side, whether you're a terrorist planning and trying to hold or a CT trying to make a retake work. It just gives the CTs more, I guess, chance to make a retake happen since they have a little bit more time to work with. I don't know. You can look at it from different angles. I don't necessarily think this is a bad change. I just don't get, once again, why it was needed. Once again, it seems like a thing that wasn't broken, but some reason gets fixed or tweaked or whatever you want to call it. I don't get why we couldn't just make matchmaking more in line with competitive play if matchmaking is supposed to be competitive CSGO. Why not just make competitive matchmaking match league play and major play and all that good stuff rather than beating in the middle? It just seems kind of silly, but at the same time it's not devastating, it's not game breaking. I can see people getting used to this and adjusting trigger words, I guess, from some of the guys out there on Twitter. But I don't see this being like a huge deal. I'm sure people will be fine with it in the long run. Just seems like it was unnecessary, though. So the next thing in gameplay is the adjusted recovery time on the AK, and the two M4s, A4 and the A1S, which basically reduced the range at which spraying is preferable to tapping or bursting. It basically just means that your spraying at range is more difficult because it takes longer to reset or what have you. So it makes spraying, I guess, less viable at distance than it used to be, which I guess makes more of an incentive to do tapping or bursting at more ranges, longer ranges. Again, it's one of those situations where I feel like it was a mechanic in the game that wasn't broken, so why does it need a tweak or a fix? It seemed like it was perfectly fine the way it has been for quite a while. So again, I don't see why there was a need to make this change. As far as whether or not the change is good or bad, I've heard both sides of this argument where people like the idea that tapping and bursting is now incentivized, so to speak. Where spraying at range, maybe it's not such a bad thing that you can't spray at as much of a range as you used to be able to. But the problem is when you pair this with how effective the Revolver is, you're nerfing kind of one gun, and then you have this ridiculously OP gun come into the game, and that causes a huge problem. Just that alone. Now, if you remove, like, say the Revolver never comes into the game and you just change the spraying of the rifles, maybe that isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it is cool that you're incentivized to burst fire and be accurate and tap. If anything, I feel like that's a big complaint we've seen people have, where it's like, oh, you can, like, it's just random, you're just spraying or whatever. Like, you should be rewarded for your aim more. This is maybe more in regards to like net code and things like that, where people feel like people get randomed or whatever. Or this is mostly just a complaint from like lower skilled players who find an excuse for doing poorly, whatever. Maybe in the long run this can be good or okay, but when you pair it up with some of the other changes in the game, it seems like it's pretty broken. And again, the biggest point to make is on pretty much everything I've talked about so far, a big thing which changed that was never a problem or was never called on by the community to be fixed. That wasn't an issue. So you just made tweaks to the game that seemed like they were just unnecessary. And I think that's probably the theme of pretty much all these updates, except for one, which is the one I'm about to get to, which is the increase in movement inaccuracy with pistols. And this is for the dual elites, the 5.7, the Glock, the P2K, the P250, the Tech-9, the USP, and the CZ. So pretty much all the pistols, except for, I guess, this new Revolver and the Deagle. I think that's pretty much the only guns that weren't really affected, it seems like. As far as what we think about this is a big problem that people have been talking about forever, almost as old as the jumping scout and the jumping accuracy, and like the hit boxes. Like, this other problem has been around for such a long time. So to see this problem addressed where the movement inaccuracy is increased, I think that this is only a good change. I have heard like from people playing it that maybe it seems like it's really not that much of a difference. So maybe it's not even that big of a deal. Like it hasn't really affected it that much to have a major impact. I've seen people still running around with Tech 9s and killing people just fine, it seems like. So it seems like it didn't have like a dramatic impact. Again, we'd have to see more gameplay with the pistols in movement situations, I guess, to really like get a feel for whether or not this was a good change. I think it's a change in the right direction, but does it need to be changed even more? Does it need to be even more dramatic of an inaccuracy increase? That will have to be tested over time. But I think that the idea of increasing the movement and accuracy of pistols is a good one. And so this is a check mark for Valve, so to speak, like A+. Like this is something that does need to be changed. And you could even argue to a degree on a couple of these other gameplay changes like the timer and the adjusted recovery time on rifles that those could be good changes going forward. There could be some pros to them. But again, when it comes to the timers and the rifles, those seem like unnecessary changes. Same with the revolver being added, a joke that didn't need to be added. But when it comes to the increase in movement accuracy on pistols, I feel like this was something that was broken. It was a change that was necessary, unlike the other changes. It was actually addressing a problem and providing a solution. And so I think that this can only be considered a good thing. Now, also in this update, they talked about adding timeouts to competitive matchmaking, which is totally fine. This allows maybe a little bit more team play aspect in matchmaking. Other than that, I'm not really going to talk too much about it. Apparently, there is something about the killer replay where you can turn it off or something. I don't know. Not too much to talk about there. Yeah, so most of the other changes are just kind of behind the scenes stuff that isn't like really on the surface big. We did see them change up some things on the maps where they fixed some surfaces playing the wrong footstep sounds on Mirage Overpass and Trains. I guess that's just, improving on these sound updates. I think a lot of people have been having issues with the sounds in some regard and not really being able to tell where footsteps were coming from. So it seems like they are trying to patch some errors here and there on fixing the footstep sounds maybe. So I guess that's something that can be... something that could be good. And that's pretty much the bulk of the big things that were on the update. Just wanted to put a video together that talks about the initial reactions that I have to the update. Basically, to sum it up really quick, the TLDR at the end is the revolver, a fucking joke. The gameplay change to the timers and the rifles seem to just be unnecessary changes addressing a problem that was a non-issue and providing a solution that wasn't necessary. Like, I don't think that these were problems, but they could still wind up being okay changes, I suppose, going forward. The movement and accuracy for pistols is a great step in the right direction, though we still have to see whether or not it's enough of a change to really matter. And that pretty much addresses the biggest factors. So another quick thing I actually just added on to this video. When I did the initial recording, I didn't think about it, but what I wanted to add really quick is the timing of this update seems really silly. It's right before a major event taking place in North America with hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line with top teams from EU and NA competing. It's probably the final big event for the year. And it just seems rather odd that you would release an update 2 days before that event when players have really no chance to adjust to it, because even best case scenario, you're a team already where you need to be, you have computers to go play on and grind out for a couple of days. That's still a bit ridiculous to try to adjust in a couple of days right before a major tournament. And for the teams that are traveling across the pond from Europe, and even teams from NA who are traveling and don't have any access to computers, it's almost impossible to do anything to adjust to this. And even if you ban the revolver, it's still, how are you supposed to adjust to the new like spraying response of the rifles, or all this nonsense, right? It just seems really ridiculous that you would place an update right here and now. And I get that like competitions aren't Valve's major priority, but think about this really quick. It's a major event with hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line. It's the last big CSGO event of the year, and to top it all off, if you just would have waited to release this update after the ESL ESEA finals, there is basically a month break time of big events. Like the next big event that takes place in CSGO is like the middle of January, which is the $200,000 event in Belarus for Star Ladder. And then I guess there's the Red Dot Invitational. That's like the $50,000 tournament in France. It has some top teams in it. But even that is still pretty much the middle of January, a month away. So why not wait to drop the update after the ESL ESEA finals and allow 3 to 4 weeks of like play testing and tweaks before it gets put into play in a major tournament? It seems rather odd. I hope that ESEA and ESL choose to not use this update for the weekend's events that takes place this weekend of I guess it's the 10th through the 13th. Hopefully they'll decide to use the previous version of the game so this won't even be an issue. But I still think it was rather silly to even do the update in the first place right before a major event. So just wanted to add that little bit. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed this video. Follow and subscribe for more.